Hey, ho, let's go.
Hey, ho, let's go.
He wanted to
The podcast is about to start now. Shut your fucking mouth now. Let's get drunk.
Actually, our first went well. Let's get drunk.
This podcast is not suitable for children or those who are easily disturbed. Spoiler warning for whatever is in the title of this episode.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share and subscribe. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible and all other major podcast apps.
The old sleep poorly. Perhaps they stand watch. Sometimes that is better. The soil of a man's heart is stonier. A man grows what he can, and he tends it. Don't go beyond, no matter how much you feel you need to, Doctor. The barrier was not made to be broken. Remember this, there is more power here than you know. It is old and always restless. Remember. Welcome to a very highly anticipated episode of The Horror of Babylon. This is episode 70, where we discuss Stephen King's masterpiece, Pet Sematary. I am Ryan, and with me as always is Daniel. Say hi, Daniel.
Hi, Daniel.
And Hef is here too.
How y'all doing? Good to be here.
And we want to jump in by saying thank you to our patrons, Abigail the First, Breaker of Chains, Forcer of Jelly Beans, and
Logan,
the Full Metal Patron. And a special thank you to Horsemen Comics and Gaming, which you can visit at the Morgantown Mall in Morgantown, West Virginia, or the Mall at Robinson in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And Ronald III, the Blob of Christmas, will be joining us on our next Pet Sematary episode, where we discuss the classic Pet Sematary from 1989.
and we make him eat jelly beans.
And we might do that, yeah. All right, before we jump into this book, since it's been a little bit since we've had Hef here, not since the amazing experience of River of Teeth, so we want to catch up with Hef and let him tell us a little bit about what's going on in the world of the Horror of Babylon plays.
We just wrapped up Haunting Ground. That game was a rough grind, as I made a mention of, and if you watch the final video, had a few people actually reach out to me on that one, so that they were really glad to see that at the very least it was, it was done, because there aren't a whole lot of
it is finished.
Yeah,
It is done.
yeah. I think one YouTube reviewer was just like, "You're not inept. I love the Let's Play."
Yeah, that was a comment. I remember it,
and I that warmed my heart, because that was, whoever you were, that was the whole reason I did it.
I'm glad. I'll have to make more fake accounts to give you comments.
So, we just did, actually, it was one of the things I'm looking into now is actually taking a bunch of your all's streams and kind of compressing them down into a compilation show.
I like those. I think they're way better than the actual streams.
Yeah, we did one with Silent Hill. Got some good content out of that. I thought that was great. And I just started Dead Space. As of production right now, I've done 3 of them. I'm going to do more this weekend. I'm super stoked for those, because I really think as far as like content, like we finally hit a standard as far as like what I think as far as the Let's Plays, and I'm super excited to do more like that. I'm finally getting a handle on a lot of things. Look forward to more Dead Space, and then surprise after that. Probably going to have another mid-section where I have one where you guys are doing kind of a compilation thing. I'm going to try to do those to kind of break up a little bit.
Rusty Lake.
There's possibly that's on the docket.
It was requested in a comment.
I know, and that comment will be rewarded, I promise.
Stream Five Nights at Freddy's for what
Yeah,
was his
we
name?
need to do that too. Yeah, I think it was Gage.
Gage. Oh no,
It's not Gage. It's not Gage.
he got me.
But look forward to more content. I'm super stoked to do more, and I've got a lot of plans ahead.
Awesome. All right, trigger warning. Obviously, if you are triggered, and who isn't, but triggered by the death of a child, that is a serious topic in this book, and it's in the movies that follow it, and in our discussion of this book. Also, in recent years, Pet Sematary has been flagged as a somewhat problematic book in terms of its depiction of Indigenous American culture. That's not something we're going to speak to on this podcast because it's not something that we can speak to with authority. There are lots of good articles out there. If you want to learn more about that, please feel free to Google that. There is a conversation out there about this subject. We're not going to have it here, not because I don't want to recognize it, just because we're not the people to have that conversation.
Yeah, 2 white guys and an Egyptian.
Yeah. Who actually has some Indigenous American blood, but
I do, but not enough like historical experience and or like lineage to be able to speak of it.
Hey, Hef, you want to hear my impression of every white person ever?
Is it just you talking?
I'm actually 1/16 Cherokee.
You know what's funny? I am 1/16 Cherokee.
my favorite thing is when people say like a fraction that like makes no sense. Like I'm 1/24 Cherokee.
That's not how that works.
That's not how that works.
Okay.
All right. So we're gonna kick it off with our history of Pet Sematary, and we're gonna start with Hef.
So I've seen various renditions of this. Like, I never actually sat and read the novel, obviously, until we started doing stuff like this. But I'd seen sci-fi existed, and for some reason sci-fi was where you watched horror movies on cable. So I've seen bits and pieces of various Pet Sematary renditions. I think 2 that I'm aware of. Before the 2019 one, right?
There's 2, yeah. There's the original from 1989 and Pet Sematary 2 from 1991 or one.
A masterpiece in cinema.
I love both. 1992.
Fun fact, it was why we never owned a cat in my household growing up.
Well, you literally lived on the road. So.
I did.
Yeah. And that's what passed for a busy road in that area.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to go down that road.
Just
Beth
right
lives down that road.
Just it was just right off 20.
Go get your cats.
Yeah.
Use them for his.
Getting older,
So you
though.
never really like sat and actually watched the movies.
Growing up, I was not real big on scary movies. I got exposed to The Lost Boys when I was like 9, and then like anything that
Turned you off.
anything that was scary related, I was just not about.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's changed as I've gotten older, but it's very much not something I was into when I was a kid.
That's fair. And so you're reading this novel for the very first time.
Yes.
All right, we'll let you we'll table your thoughts for now. You'll have plenty of time to expound on your opinions.
Sure.
Daniel, your history with the Pet Sematary.
I was going through this just stint of reading Stephen King books, and it was on the stack, and it terrified me. It's not the most interesting story. I started reading the Stephen King books because I was really into the Silent Hill franchise, and there's all these articles on like, oh, here's the inspiration for all of this shit you love, Daniel. So it was like I picked up The Mist and It, and Pet Sematary was on that list. I read that.
This is probably, in terms of my personal history, like top 5 most important books I've ever read. But like a lot of people, my history starts with the movie. With the original movie, which I've only seen twice. Once when I was a kid. It was in my like phase where I was going to our local video store and just running through the horror section, and just getting as much as I can and watching them. And I was specifically like getting Stephen King ones because I enjoyed it. And so I saw this movie. I was probably like really early middle school or really late elementary school, like 5th to 7th grade, somewhere in there. It scared me completely shitless. More than any other movie I saw as a kid. I guess Texas Chainsaw Massacre was a close second, but this one like scared me to the point where I was afraid of driving and afraid of roads for a long time. As an adult and then as a parent, the number one thing I'm afraid of is one of my kids getting hit by a car. And I have a special needs child who loves to play outside and does not understand that you cannot play in the road. So it's something that's constantly on my mind. I didn't experience anything more with Pet Sematary from ages like 10 to like 30 something when I eventually read the book. But still, like that 20-year gap, this is a story that I think about almost daily. Like every time I'm outside near a road with my son and he's out playing, this is something that's pervasive in my mind. So when I got into actually reading Stephen King, this was the fourth one I read. I read It, and then, the Seasons one.
Different Seasons?
Different Seasons was the second one I read, and then Salem's Lot, and then this one. And I read this one specifically because I kind of wanted to face it. I was like, it was kind of me like facing my fears without actually facing my fears, because my fear is my kid getting hit by a car. So it was kind of like, all right, it's time to fucking do this. And the book shook me harder than probably any piece of media has ever shaken me. Only one book that comes even kind of close, and that's Lolita, and it's not. It's still like 2 or 3 notches down below this one, but still, like it was hard. And then after I read the book, I rewatched the movie. Haven't seen it since. I've only watched it twice, and I watched Pet Sematary 2, and then the new one I saw on release night with Daniel and Carrie, and have watched it one time since. But it's a
movie. It exists.
Yeah, it's better than It Chapter 2.
Yeah.
This book is extremely, this book and the movie are extremely significant to me in my story.
The vampire's a pure myth, superstition. I may be able to bring you proof that the superstition of yesterday can become the scientific reality of today.
We're jumping into background, and like we did with the Only Good Indians, we're actually going to start with a little bit of education.
Education?
We're going to learn a little bit about the real Micmac people.
I just assumed he made them up.
They are real?
I was waiting for him to like make a joke about how Miss Frizzle had like all her kids jizzed on by like a fish sperm.
What?
I'm sorry, I'm still heated.
Okay, so
I'm still coming to give. Just keep going. It's fine.
So the Micmac are kind of in modern culture just referred to as the Pet Sematary people. So I just wanted to throw out, yes, they were real. Here are some factoids about them just to spread the knowledge. Similarly to how we started our Only Good Indians episode, where we learned a little bit about the actual tribe that was involved there. So they are actually the largest tribe in Canada. Where they lived prior to European settlement, it was now modern Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, Maine, and Massachusetts. They spoke an Algonquin dialect, and they were part of the Abenaki Confederacy, which was a group of Algonquin-speaking tribes, and they were the foes of the Iroquois Confederacy. The Iroquois Confederacy is probably something that American history students are a little more familiar with, because they sided with the British in a lot of conflicts, like the French and Indian War and the American Revolution and such. The first European explorer to interact was the Italian explorer John Cabot. He first encountered them in 1497, and he described them as fierce and warlike. They were actually the first tribe in Canada to be converted by the Jesuits and began intermarrying with the settlers of New France. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Micmac were allies of the French against the English. So against the English, against the Iroquois. They were very much on the French side of things, which, of course, they were from Canada, so that makes sense. And so much so, in fact, they actually traveled south into English-controlled New England and conducted raids against frontier settlements in New England. They were seasonally nomadic. In the winter, they hunted caribou and moose and small game. And Daniel learned that those are different animals during the Only Good Indians. What do you mean an elk and a deer aren't the same thing? In the summer, they fished and gathered shellfish and hunted seals. Contemporary Mi'kmaq communities are largely predominantly located in Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, but they do have a significant presence in Quebec, Newfoundland, Maine, and the Boston area. In July of 2022, the Mi'kmaq language was officially recognized as the first language of Nova Scotia. Now you know a little bit about the Mi'kmaq. More than that.
Paddywhack.
Give it. Bury my dog's bone.
Oh my god. How long were you sitting on that?
For a while.
Heavily edited. All right. So, background on the novel, Pet Sematary, was published November 14th, 1983. It was nominated for a World Fantasy Award for Best Novel in 1984, and it lost to The Dragon Waiting by John Ford. King has been nominated for this award 9 times and has never won.
That surprises me a lot.
Yeah. He's not... He has won some awards, but he's not as... What's the word where you have a lot of awards? He's not as recognized as much as he should be, probably because of his genre.
I think most people think that horror is easy to write.
No.
I mean, I'm not... I don't...
I don't think
agree
anything is easy to write.
Well, so that's my thing. Like, I think it's just, to me, like, horror... I can't remember where I read it, but I was reading something at some point that said that, like, horror is, like, one of the easiest things to start writing. Because really, you just need a concept, and the rest of it you can just fill in. Like, don't necessarily agree with it, but that's what I've heard.
I guess it's not difficult to come up with a concept because, like, so many horror stories are similar and they take from each other.
I have an idea.
Yeah.
I kind of feel this with his, how he's been, like, nominated for so many awards and hasn't got any. And all I can picture is,
Leonardo DiCaprio?
No, I was gonna, well, also, yes. I was picturing Bill in college, Let It Be Pulp, where he finally just goes, fine, I'm just gonna write what I want to write anyway.
Oh.
And I can't.
Bill Denbrough.
Yeah.
I was picturing Bill Dauterive.
Hey, Bill, how'd your book sell? Oh, it's fine. I'm just up here to kill myself.
Diary of a Barber.
Bill Denbrough.
Okay.
He just writes what he wants to write now.
Yeah.
Because he doesn't need to care about awards because he's a millionaire.
King wrote this while he was working at the University of Maine, and he was renting a house adjacent to a major road. His daughter's cat, Smucky, was actually killed by a truck on that road, and he was inspired by her throwing a tantrum saying, "He's my cat! He's not God's cat! Let God have his own cat! Let God have all the damn old cats he wants! Kill them all!" That's actually the quote from the book, but she said something similar. He started imagining, like, what would happen if you could resurrect that cat, if there was like a burial ground where you could plant an animal and it would come back. And then what if somebody did that with a person? And then that obviously comes from The Monkey's Paw, which is one of my all-time favorite short stories by W.W. Jacobs. Have you guys read The Monkey's Paw?
Nope.
Years ago.
I acted in the play adaptation of it in high school.
We will definitely do an episode on The Monkey's Paw. It is excellent. And this is kind of a modern retelling of The Monkey's Paw. It borrows heavily from The Monkey's Paw. King thinks he went too far with this, and he actually intended to not publish it. But his wife read it and liked it, said it was too good to not be published, and he was switching publishers at the time, and he owed them a book, and it was the only thing that was close to being ready, so he ended up publishing it because of that. And like we mentioned earlier, it has spawned 3 films: Pet Sematary from 1989, Pet Sematary 2 from 1992, and the remake, Pet Sematary 2 from 2019, which Daniel prefers because all remakes are better. Kidding. I'm giving you shit. I did not know this until today, and I want to find it. I want to listen to it. In 1997, BBC Radio did a dramatization of Pet Sematary. They did it in 6 half-hour episodes, and it was later re-edited into 3 hour-long episodes. I really want to listen to that because I can only imagine what a dramatization of Pet Sematary would sound like.
Get Michael C. Hall to be in it, too.
Yeah. And then the Ramones song, The Blitzkrieg Bop, is constantly referenced in the novel, so much so that they actually got the Ramones to record a theme song for the movie called Pet Sematary, which plays at the end of the film, and it appears on their album, Brain Drain. And I don't want to be buried in the Pet Cemetery.
Before we all started doing the hey ho let's go thing, that was my plan for this whole episode.
Yeah.
Just to interject it.
And that's that. Another story in the classic, infallible 3-act structure. Good enough for Aristotle, good enough for The Simpsons.
Mr. Sislak, I have a feeling there's going to be one more act to this story.
Well, I'm not hanging around for that. 4 acts.
All right, moving to structure and themes. This is not a typical Stephen King novel in terms of structure, in terms of prose, in terms of its message. So let's start with structure. And Daniel, why don't you tell us a little bit about how the structure of this book is different from a lot of his other novels?
For starters, this book, and I think I sent you this in a message, it's the perfect example of a slow burn.
Yes.
If you want to know how to do a slow burn right, read Pet Sematary.
Yeah.
You build up the characters, their lives. You sprinkle in bits of the weird shit that you want to get to later, but you don't jump right in. And Stephen King books, he's not like breakneck speed, but a lot of times like, yeah, there's the vampire, like chapter 4.
Yeah.
There's the
it's usually like the horror is mixed in with your like initial development.
yeah. And with this, it's almost all just character building for like, God, almost half of the book.
I'd say more than half.
Yeah.
Because
But before this even comes up.
part 1, it's in 3 parts.
Yeah.
And part 1, I believe, is more than 50% of the book.
Yeah.
And the horror really begins at part 2.
Yeah. And it's like, there's like little hints. Like you'll have Judd talk about the Micmacs.
Mm-hmm.
But he's not saying, oh, but they had this burial ground where the dead would rise.
No.
Yeah, that's not in there.
No.
It's him, like, talking about his wife and their home lives. It's parents fighting over how to address the conversation of death with their daughter. It's very tight.
I would say, and just from the ways we typically evaluate structure, 1, it's mostly chronological.
There is one flashback, and it's Judd telling a story.
The beginning of part 2 is a little out of order.
Yeah.
Because they at the beginning of part 2, it's Gage is dead.
Yeah.
And then they go backwards and tell the story.
And then they work their way back from
Yeah,
that.
but 90+% of it is chronological, which is not typical for King. It's also almost entirely from one character's perspective, which is not normal for him.
Yeah, because he usually does multiple character perspectives.
Only a little bit of part 2 and part 3 are from Rachel, Judd, and Steve's perspectives. Almost all of it's from Lewis.
I'd say at like 90%.
Yeah. And just like the language in it is a little more like to the point.
It's more Natsuki, less Yuri.
Yeah. Hef, what are your thoughts on the structure?
Cats can't die.
The structure is a 2-heartbeat method. Very much favors somebody who's almost not even in a arrhythmia. It's very much somebody who, like, you're going to a doctor and they're just taking your pulse. There is a slow rise up to a peak point, and then it drops immediately back down, and then it slowly rises again until it hits that kind of that peak moment in the heartbeat, and then drops down again, which is the end of the book in this sense. The book is in 3 parts, but you can technically say it's in 2.
I feel like 2 is more accurate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because the last part is quite literally, I think, like 10 pages.
Yeah.
Maybe. So to me, this is very much like it is a very much of a build-up that starts off very, 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 very slow. and you're introducing your characters, you're getting your groundwork in, you're basically elaborating on everything that is building up to the climactic point of the midsection of the book, and then it immediately drops off into a depressive state. And from that depressive state, your pulse kind of starts to generate again, and it pushes up a little more and more and more and more until you get to that basically breakneck 50 pages of where everything comes to a head.
Turns to shit.
And just fucking, yeah, just assaults your mind.
Everything you just said, I completely agree with. This is, in my opinion, the best example of a slow burn horror story. I'm very picky about slow burn to the point where I've been accused of not liking slow burn. I do. It has to be like really good. I'm not going to sit through an hour of boring crap to watch some people get stabbed. Ideally, what I really wanted to say is, ideally, if we had infinite time to record, how I would have wanted to do this is had all of us, specifically you, read up to the end of part 1, then I drive down to your house, take the book away, we record an episode just on part 1, and then give you the book back, read part 2 and 3, and then record a second episode.
I understand why you would want to do that.
Yeah. Themes. Just in general, before we talk about all the themes, because there's a lot of them, but there is one that's just super obvious and super pervasive throughout the whole book. Let's just talk about another way that this is very different from most Stephen King books. You could say it's darker, and it is. And most Stephen King books are pretty dark. But the thing that sets King books apart is that they generally have, if not a happy ending, at least a hopeful ending. Like, some number of characters make it out, some relationships survive. There's usually some sort of optimism in the ending.
It's not quite Dean Koontz optimism.
No. Nobody's like getting married on the beach and then going to Hawaii. But Hef, tell us, what did you think? How did this compare to some of the other Stephen King books that you've read?
It is a stark difference. You have like I think
George Stark.
Yeah, sorry. But before you start going into like Stephen Kingville, like I think there's like this prejudice that a lot of people have if they've never really read his work, and that they're all just these dark, awful, gory, oversexed tales of various things. And Pet Sematary was my 9th Stephen King book, and I can, as someone who's read several of his books right now, I can safely say that that's really not the case most of the time. Like, oversexed sometimes.
Yeah.
But in terms of like a dismal outlook by the time you're done with it, most of the books I've read really do have a genuinely optimistic kind of outlook on things. I would say that the ones that are different are usually his short stories. The short stories tend to be a lot more dismal of endings, but I think they're supposed to be that way.
Stories,
well, they're supposed to pack a punch, right? Like, it's a smaller...
They have stinger endings a lot of the time.
Right, yeah.
The only, like, novel or novella that I can think of off the top of my head that has an ending like this dour is Apt Pupil.
I agree.
Yeah.
I actually, about a month ago, finished that one. And it's, yeah... But that one is just like terrible people being terrible people. Yeah. So, I mean, it's very much... I'm not going to... It's almost asked for by the time you get to the end of the book.
How else could that book have ended?
Right, yeah. There's no happy ending for a book like that.
Whereas there could have possibly been a happy ending.
Yeah, this one is very much like... These are not bad people that just really end up in a much worse situation and a much... dour end result than really what anybody in the book deserves.
The first of our themes, and that is obviously death, aka Oz the Great and Terrible. To me, this is the most honest book I've ever read about death, and it's not just about death, but it's about how we view it, how we process it, how different people live with death and the concept of death.
This book asks the question, like, because so many people will think, like, as a parent, I'm sure you can agree, we all have that understanding that as a parent who wants to do the best for their child, we are willing to die for our children. But what we're never asked, and we never want to be asked, is can we live without them once we have them? And that's what this book asks.
It's every good parent's worst nightmare.
Yes.
And this has come up in several books. This is the third that I can think of where it's a situation where a child dies and the parents have to live with the relationship with the existing child. So in this book, Gage dies and Lewis and Rachel will have to live for Ellie. In it, Georgie dies but Bill is still alive. In The Body, I don't remember the characters' names, but the main character, his older brother dies, and it negatively impacts his relationship with his mother.
I think that's Chris.
I think Chris was Phoenix. Shit, hold on. To Google. Gordy.
Okay.
Gordy, yeah. Chris Chambers, that's River Phoenix. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, I don't recommend watching the movie immediately after reading the book. I would definitely give it some time.
All right.
All right. So yeah, in The Body, Gordy LaChance, his older brother is killed while in the service in like a car accident, and it affects his relationship with his parents the same way that it does with Bill and Georgie and so on. So that's a running theme, and I wish I had an explanation as to why that theme comes up often in Stephen King books, and I've done some research to see if he lost a sibling, but if he had, it's not something that's like publicly addressed.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I think it's a matter of numbers. Like, how many books has he written? I mean,
50-ish.
Yes, 50-ish. I mean,
honestly, some writers.
That's not is that even including his short stories?
No,
I mean, so that's what I'm saying.
Like novels.
Like, I feel like that tends to just kind of amalgamize into you have to have something to scar the people, otherwise it doesn't.
At least 73.
And some writers just happen to be more insightful than others.
Yeah.
Stephen King is very good at. God, what's a good? It's not just
he's
characterization.
publicizing trauma.
Well, he's very good at making people actual people.
Yeah, like a lot of his characters are a lot deeper than most of what you get in other.
Like
novels.
in this book, when Lewis and Rachel are fighting over how to talk about death to their how old was Ellie? 5.
She's very young.
Kindergarten.
Yeah, like how to talk about death to their kid. I was like, this is like the most real couples argument I've ever read in a book.
Yeah.
I'm like, this sounds like something I might have overheard my parents screaming at each other over.
And just to mention it now, but still stay on death, like marriage is also a really big theme.
Yeah.
Like their relationship is like delved into deeply.
Yeah, like here's how she's been such a bitch to me and how she gets away with it each and every time. But at the same time, it's like...
But he also makes a point of countering it by saying this is not something to condemn her for.
Yeah.
Like, he understands that he has faults, too. And he understands that he is somebody who just thinks differently than what she does based on the trauma she's had.
It does a really good job of justifying why she has the opinion that she has on death. Mm-hmm. And I actually think that she should be worse off than she is based on what she experienced. Mm-hmm. But 65 novels, 5... non-fiction books, 11 short story collections, and a lot of screenplays and some comics and other stuff.
That's
where does he get the energy?
Cocaine.
So I need to start doing cocaine to be a better writer.
No,
to write more, maybe.
To write faster.
So I actually, I think I sent you a video from this YouTube channel, but I started watching a YouTube channel that evaluates authors, and it evaluates their success based on 3 things: how hard they work, how talented they are, and how lucky they got. And when they do Stephen King, it's he gets full marks in all 3.
Yeah.
They also did one on Dean Koontz, and he got full marks in how hard he works and how lucky he got.
Yeah.
He does not get full marks in how talented he is.
They don't like the optimism.
They spent a lot of time talking about his erotica that he wrote in his early days.
We need to do at least one episode on that.
A lot of his early books are super expensive on eBay because they have not been reprinted.
Yeah, he wants them to be forgotten.
Yeah. And a lot of them also weren't written under his name. I think he had a female pen name for his erotica.
That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah. Okay, so continuing about death, there's two like main things I wanted to point out. So there's lots of deaths, but there's two like main deaths in this book. One is Norma Crandall, the other is obviously Gage Creed.
Yeah.
Norma is basically the best circumstance that you could have for someone to die. She's someone who's led a long life, a happy life. She passes mostly painlessly, and it also wasn't sudden. It was something that they expected and they had time to come to terms with. And Gage is the complete opposite, where it's somebody who's only been alive for a couple years, dies very suddenly in a horrific and violent way. Mm-hmm. And it just does a really good job of drawing the parallels between those two things. And then what's even more important to me is you have 4 major characters and you get these 4 different outlooks on death. Judd views death as an old friend. He's been alive for a long time. He's seen people come and go.
He's also seen people come back.
Yeah, which we'll get into. He's come to terms with death for what it is. He's been mentally preparing himself for the death of his wife. Lewis is a younger man, but he's a doctor, and he views death as a natural result of life. He thinks about your metabolism being your timer clock, and you die when your metabolism runs out.
It's very clinical for him up until it isn't.
Yeah. And then Rachel is a young woman who's very irrational about death and avoids talking about it.
It's impolite.
Yeah. She's justified in it, though. And then Ellie is the child who's curious about death, doesn't know anything about death, and is the one who's asking questions. So you have these 4 like very different perspectives, and then you get to see how all 4 of those kind of collide when Norma dies, and then you get to see it again when Gage dies, and how there's very different results.
Yes.
Yes.
You guys are just being very concise. It's hard for me to add.
I have been meditating on this book
so
deeply for like 2 weeks.
He sat on top of a mountain and contacted the spirits of the Micmacs.
Yeah. It's also important to note like how radically everything changes when you're faced with one versus the other. Like with Norma, like, again, like your notes as far as like Judd says, it's an old friend. He's expecting it. It's something that was eventually going to happen.
He's the third brother,
right? But when Gage dies,
the one who has the cloak.
Yeah, but when Gage dies, Judd's reaction is to just be immediately much more mournful, because there's a very big difference between someone growing old and passing away naturally versus a young child who that should not have happened in the first place.
And it also stops being clinical for Lewis.
Right. Same with Lewis. Yeah, like, you know, when Norma dies, it's clinical. When Gage dies, it's not. Now, obviously, that has paternal yearnings as well.
It's his son. Yeah.
But it's still, like, a stark difference compared to when he handles Norma's death.
And you even get to see with Victor Pascal that he is a party to the death of a young person, but and is emotional, but still handles it relatively well.
He handles it as professionally as a doctor who was not expecting that to be his first day could.
I think the most, like, apparent version of all of the, like, as far as death being a subject here is actually Ellie herself. Like, because she, when you're, I mean, she's 5, right? So, I mean, to her, it's one of those things where, like, curiosity of an old person dying, it eventually kind of becomes, I don't want to use the word common sense, but it is something she understands. You get old, you die eventually.
Your metabolism wears out.
Right. But for Gage,
she's gonna die soon.
She literally has to come to terms with the fact that not only is her brother dead, and while it's not explored in the book, you could also incentivize that, like, she now has to grasp the concept that she's not mortal either. This is a 5-year-old that's grasping with the concept of mortality because her brother that is younger than her is now gone, which makes it much more likely that she is now also in that same vein, which makes it much more amplified as far as a fear of death.
So I want to mention this now before we continue on. Pet Sematary, the original film, and Pet Sematary 2 have the same director. And the original pitch that director made for Pet Sematary 2 was she wanted to make a sequel about Ellie, an older Ellie, and how she's like dealing with the loss of her family and kind of continue that story. And the studio said, no, a movie about a girl will never sell. And they made her, it's a good movie. It's fun. It's nothing like this, but it's stupid. It's kind of stupid fun.
Oh,
but like, I would love to see like that version of Pet Sematary.
I feel like
2.
you could pitch that these days a lot easier.
Oh yeah,
too.
I think even if it's like, oh no, because she died. Never mind.
Oops.
It's sort of weird too, because I just said that Lewis wasn't clinical with Gage, but he copes by being clinical, and that ties back into Ellie, because how he's examining all her behaviors, like how she's carrying the picture, and he's just like, eventually she's just gonna stop. One day she'll forget to bring it with her, and then she'll forget to bring it with her for a couple days, and eventually it'll just be something that happened in 1983.
Springsteen, Madonna, way before Nirvana, there was U2 and Blondie, and music still on MTV. Her two kids in high school, they tell her that she's uncool, but she's still preoccupied with 1983.
I'm sorry. But yeah, that is honestly kind of, unless you absolutely let someone's death destroy you, which I have seen happen, it does eventually just become something that happened.
It does, but at the same time, like in this particular instance, this is focusing on the few days that are after everything.
Yeah.
The book is like Lewis's mental state, like as far as like the actual like writing of it, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
Like he constantly goes between clinically obvious to this is gonna work, even though like he has no justification for it.
He rationalizes.
He rationalizes way too much to the point where you can read it and be like, no, this is not gonna work. But in his mind, clinically, it is.
I'm gonna draw a spiral.
But yeah.
Okay, so and then obviously our next theme which is tied to the overall theme of death, is grief, the death of a child. I think we kind of tied that. We can keep going. Okay, the next one, reanimation. What I love about this book is that it's both a zombie story and a ghost story, but it's so subtle that you don't even realize that it's either until you're like done with it and like, whoa, bro.
It is. It's that same kind of thing where like it's all like there's so much of a slow turn with everything that, again, like I said, like those last 50 pages are really where it all starts to come together, and you don't have time to think about it because those last 50 pages are basically a blitzkrieg. You're just reading.
Blitzkrieg.
You're just going. Like you don't care what's happening. You're following along, trying to keep up because the rest of the book has just kind of had this slow inclination several times. And then when it finally decides it's going to actually put the pedal to the metal, you're not thinking, you're just reading.
Yeah, and because it did such a good job with the character building with Lewis and Rachel and Judd and the kids, like that makes the latter half of it so horrific.
It punches you. It is a hell of a punch.
Yeah. What about zombies and ghosts?
So the zombies themselves, I mean, obviously Gage is reanimated. So, like, he obviously came back as a zombie. The ghost part, I believe, I guess you could say it's Zelda.
I was referring to Victor.
Oh, Victor himself.
But, I mean,
okay.
Yeah.
I always thought of it as more of a possession story anyway. Because when they come back, they're clearly not themselves.
Like, it's to a degree like everything, like everybody sees kind of what they are afraid of in a way.
Zombies are also not themselves.
Yeah.
So
well, like Gage's body is like the actual catalyst of everything, and it just kind of like goes with the original Micmac curse of everything. Just kind of, this book is very eye for an eye kind of thing, For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And even though Rachel herself is not at all involved with any of the stuff that happens up to that last point, she still gets a weird kind of punishment because of her sister Zelda, which has, while it has no affiliation with this, that's what she's afraid of. That's her fear. That's the whole thing of her actually being as neurotic as she is about death. So, in a way, this curse feels more like it's less I'm going to haunt you and more I'm going to get even with you.
All right, another big theme: Indigenous people and the Wendigo. If I think
Which spoiled Until Dawn for Ryan.
Yeah, I'll get over it. So, if you're unfamiliar with the Wendigo, I think because of Marvel Comics and some modern horror movies, the Wendigo is very misunderstood. People think of it as a cryptid of like this big, like huge hulking beast with like huge antlers, and it really originally is more of like a spirit from Indigenous American mythology or folklore, where it would possess people. Whenever there was like a lack of food, it would possess people and curse people to become cannibals. And it was, I don't want to say a ghost, but like a malevolent spirit. Mm-hmm. And I think, to me, I would say primarily because of Marvel and the Wendigo appearing in Alpha Flight and Wolverine and Hulk comics, it's kind of got this image more of a monster. And then there have been modern movies that have kind of pushed that cryptid kind of view of it. What do you guys think?
So I've seen Wendigos almost referenced as almost Yeti-like too.
Yeah,
like there's a lot of that. A book I read within the last year was called Bone White. It's about if y'all like, if Stephen King's in your wheelhouse, check out an author named Ronald Malfi.
Yeah, Bone White's really good.
He's an author that's been slowly kind of coming up in the horror realm. I've been checking out a few of his books every now and then, and in Bone White, they kind of make a reference as the monster and that thing kind of being a Wendigo kind of character, and it's more of it's Yeti-like. It's certainly not what you would consider to be most like accurate with like the indigenous beliefs, but again, it's much more modern in the sense of like what modern day people would think a Wendigo is, which is kind of Yeti-like.
Yeah, and I like both interpretations of the Wendigo, mm-hmm. but this is definitely more true to like the original story.
Like it creeps in your mind,
yeah,
more than anything.
Yeah, it's a spirit infecting bodies, directly referencing the last time it infected a body.
And it does have a corporeal body, or at least it can manifest one.
It seems that there's something out there that is seen, maybe.
Yeah, and even like it's not the scariest part of the book, mm-hmm. but it's probably the most foreboding.
I think I don't want to. The word weird isn't doing justice to how I want to describe it, because weird kind of has like a negative connotation.
Mm-hmm. It is the most supernatural part of an unsupernatural book.
Yeah, that's
the way I took it.
I am struggling to find a word like when he's seeing the Wendigo's face, or when he's hearing it like moving trees around, like it has a physical presence out there.
Mm-hmm.
That it's so out of place, but so not out of place at the same time.
To me, like, I think two of my favorite sections of the book is both times when he traversed between the Deadfall and the Micmac burial ground, because it's almost like if you guys have read any Dark Tower, I could get a little more specific with this, but it seems like the area between the Deadfall and the Micmac burial ground are like where worlds are pushing up against each other and things are crossing over, and like Victor said, the barrier.
Yeah,
I think. And again, we have to do Dark Tower sometime.
Those are just the loons.
Not fucking loons. Joe, you fucking full liar. You full shit.
Whatever you do, don't look at the noises.
I think those descriptions of the Wendigo just kind of off in the distance walking are extremely haunting, and I have had dreams about that after reading this book.
You're also notoriously afraid of giant things.
Have you seen Antlers yet?
No, but I want to.
Watch Antlers.
I've got it on there.
It does it's not nearly this level, of course, but I think at the end of the day it does a pretty good mix.
Should do a bonus episode.
Okay. I'll do a bonus. I'll watch Antlers again.
Cool. And then obviously, I mean, we touched on indigenous people. Like, we're not going to go deep on that, but this is just it's the way that he says that it's not the curse of the Wendigo and the Micmac burial ground. It's not blamed on them because it's speculated that the ground was bad before they even got here.
Yeah.
But because they were the first people...
Or that something turned the ground bad, which might have been a Wendigo spirit.
But since they were the first people here, it's known as the Micmac burial ground. Right.
But they're like, other people might have used it before, and people are going to use it after. Maybe even the Micmacs if they get the land back.
Yeah. Another big theme is the nature of cats, and I just...
Yeah.
I love... Cats are huge in this book. Well, a cat is huge. And
but it does talk about the nature of cats a lot.
I love this quote. Cats were the gangsters of the animal world, living outside the law and often dying there. There were a great many of them who would never grow old by the fire.
Yeah, it's a good quote.
And I don't have the quote, but there's a point where Lewis says that they lead violent lives.
Yeah.
And you don't think about it because the fucking cats are lying around, they're sleeping, they're licking themselves, but...
Until a door is left
open.
And all of a sudden it's World War III in the carport.
Because that's how cats are, they're super territorial.
Can you imagine if that happened like when we were talking about church?
We would have pissed off.
The first time I read this... we have 2 cats here in the studio, and our cats are relegated to the bottom floor of our house because my significant other developed a cat and dog allergy late in life. We just found that out in the past year. Previously, the cats had free roam of the entire house. So 2 years ago when I read this book for the first time, they were allowed upstairs. And they often slept with me. Sometimes they would jump on me in the middle of the night, which happened while I was reading this book several times. And I might have had a violent reaction 1 or 2 times.
There was one evening, I remember as I was reading this book, where I have recently started to become a Dr. Squatch man.
Yeah.
Very much so.
I
love
want to, but it's so expensive.
Sponsor us, Dr. Squatch.
Honestly, you can cut this out. You can find them at Walmart for like $5, which sounds like a lot. It does.
I cheap out on soap, deodorant.
I'm allergic to my own sweat, so I have to use menthol dandruff shampoo as a body wash.
Either Dr. Squatch or I recommend Buff City soap.
Yeah,
is a good one. But they're natural soaps. I'm big on natural soap right now.
I have gotten goat soap from a place in Buchanan, and I love that, but I go through it so fast.
Yeah, that's the biggest detriment.
Is it goats?
Goat milk.
It's goat milk.
Okay.
Yeah, it lathers real nice.
I was like, did they put it in a grinder?
Yeah,
but so one of the ones that I got recently has a milk a milk ingredient in it, which kind of just obviously for lather effect or whatnot,
or to keep the Edward Elricks away.
Yes, as you do. So I'm asleep one night, deep asleep, which is rare for me, and I feel this rough thing eating at the webs of the webs between my fingers, and I'm just sitting there being like, what the fuck? And I punch it in my dream. I come to wake up as I'm punching said entity, and I watch as my cat makes the biggest face I've ever seen in my life in surprise, because I literally just punched my cat straight in the nose.
I did not punch my cat.
And then Jackie wakes up, half asleep, looks at me insinuatingly and says, "Why the fuck would you punch my cat in the face?" And I was like, and all I could think was, he was licking the webbing of my fingers. And she was looking at me, she's like, "What did you do to provoke it?"
You have milk smell
I'm
all
like,
over you.
and it took me 2 days because he did it twice in 2 nights, and that's the only thing that changed in that time. So my thought process is that it had to be the soap I switched to. That he's just like licking the milk, as I'm.
You smell like milk.
That's
the funniest shit.
That's pretty good. I am not cutting that out.
I have.
I've never seen a cat eyes go wider in my life.
I have 4 cats buried in my backyard, and ever since I read this book, I've been having nightmares about that. So,
real quick note on world building. Obviously, this book, the world building doesn't compare to like It or Salem's Lot or several other books. But you, through Judd and his stories, you actually get like a pretty good picture of Ludlow, and I would say that world building is important and it is enjoyable. In this, yeah. And then we talked about it being slower.
It feels like very natural world building, so.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
Moving on to characters, and somebody... We're going to start, obviously, with Lewis Creed, who, to me, I don't know that I would say, like, he's one of my favorite King protagonists, but I feel like he's one of the most relatable... And I think he's making his way up my list. If this is your first time reading this book, what's your thoughts on Dr. Lewis Creed?
He's necessary.
Yes, he is.
He is necessary in the sense that I don't think he's an actual character. Not gonna lie. Like, honestly, I think the characters are weak in this book. I will explain.
You'll have to.
Yeah.
Lewis.
I'm ready for this.
Lewis is meant to be you as the paternal reader. He is not meant to be anything. He has no outlandish concepts. He has no uniqueness as far as anything, as far as an individualistic character. He is about as vanilla of a person as you could possibly be. There is nothing extraordinary about him, with the exception of him being a doctor for plot convenience. The only thing he is necessary for is for the eventual point that you get to where you as the parent have to sympathize with him because Gage has died, and you as the reader are to experience this from a paternal perspective of your child dying. That's how I view Lewis Creed. He's meant to just be your catalyst.
Yeah.
To experience the harshness of the book.
He does that better than almost any other protagonist in any other book.
But that's not as a protagonist, but as a catalyst. To me, as a character, he's not unique. He's not individualistic. But he is the perfect encapsulation of what you as the parent want to be. He's a good parent. So I would even say he's a remarkable parent. He tries to teach his kids good. He tries to enlighten them of the world and some of its harshness. I mean,
I don't think we're on the same page.
That's
here.
fair.
I think he's phenomenal.
Okay.
I also think he's phenomenal.
There's very few Stephen King characters that I relate to more than Lewis Creed. I think Andy McGee is close.
As a parent.
Yeah.
You agree? Yeah.
Yeah.
That's my point.
I don't understand.
Lewis Creed as a parent, as a paternal figure, is fine. Lewis Creed as a character is just...
What's the difference?
I would argue you are the difference. You as the person who are reading said book are supposed to identify with Lewis Creed because you are the parent in this particular scenario.
So it sounds like we're firing on all cylinders. That's the point. Like he wrote the character so I would relate with him and it would be an effective story.
But that doesn't make him unique. It just makes him you.
I agree with the words that you're saying, but I think they're good.
He's coming to the opposite conclusion with the same data.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's the point of the book is for you to have an emotional reaction, and that's successful because Lewis is such a relatable character, and you're able to get so deeply into his head that when the bad stuff happens, you feel it all the more. So in my books, A+. Good job, Steve.
Okay. From my point of view, that's fine as a book experience. It's just as a character, it's just like, okay, you want to know the fun fact about this?
What?
I didn't like this book.
Okay.
We're about to have a lot of arguments here. This is where we get to the good stuff.
Oh, wow. Mom, Dad, stop fighting.
So, okay.
Continue.
Daniel, what are your thoughts on Lewis?
You know how one of my favorite memes is saying, like, horrible character did nothing wrong?
Mm-hmm.
Lewis is the opposite of that. I say he did everything wrong, but I still agree with him.
He made understandable choices.
Yeah, that's what I mean. It's like, this is literally the worst possible thing you could do, but I do the exact same thing.
I think what I like is, you're right, there's nothing remarkable about him. He's not unique. He's just a normal dude.
He is very sympathetic.
To me, like, this guy has the perfect life. He has a wife. He has a great wife. He has 2 awesome kids. He has a job where you get to help people and you make a decent amount of money, which how many jobs are there where you get both of those? And he gets to live in rural Maine, which is like one of the prettiest places in the world. So you take somebody who's literally your average Joe who had a rough life to begin with and made it to the top. He's got this great life, and then it just all goes to shit.
His father-in-law is unnecessarily critical of him. Like, what the fuck? Like, Jesus Christ, what a dick.
Yeah. Erwin's a
cocksucker.
We talked about how he views death very clinically.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, like, it was very ironic that Rachel is the one who can't talk about death, but she's the one who processes Gage's death better, and Lewis is the one who goes off the deep end. Is that because he knows about the burial grounds? Maybe he would have had a more healthy grief process if he didn't.
Judd outright says at some point that the burial ground, just the area itself, might have caused Gage to die.
Mm-hmm. Because that truck driver
remembers none of it. Like, he literally just, like, wasn't that a thing? Like, he just literally was like, I hit a kid, and then he just grieved because he hit a kid. He's like, I just had to put the pedal to the metal. I don't know why.
Once he got to Ludlow, he just began speeding for no reason.
He's like, I have no reason to know
and
why.
He was an experienced driver who had no record of speeding.
Right.
And the area itself seems to have, like, that kind of influence over people, and it seems to extend far past the cemetery itself to where it gets into people, where he's, like, walking through a graveyard in a haze and all of a sudden just drawing the spiral and making me go, ooh, Uzumaki. You know?
Uzumaki.
By that logic, you could also, like, argue that, like, Rachel didn't become an important factor until Lewis had made the decision to do it. Because Rachel, I think, like, if you're looking at it clinically from, like, not being influenced, I feel like she would handle the death, not even really handle the death a little bit better. That's a really kind of a poor way to phrase it. But it makes sense that she would be able to accept it sooner because she's already had it happen with Zelda.
Yeah.
Whereas the influence of the whole, of the burial ground brings her back to it. And then once she gets caught up in that, then all of a sudden things are much more frantic as she gets back.
About the only real criticism, I don't even know if it's a criticism, and I don't even know what it would add. It's if all of a sudden, like, if a dead cat came back to life and was in front of me, the first thing I would do would be to take it to a vet, because I'd be so fucking curious. And, like, he was, like, before that, he was so clinically minded. The first time I read this book, I'm like, I wonder what he's going to do to the cat. Because I pictured him, like maybe trying to poke it or prod it, even though he's not a vet, just to see how it reacts more. And he observes its behavior, but past that, he's like, I don't want anything to do with it. Which I also get, because it's
gross.
It's gross. It's a dead thing that's come back to life, and it's weird and smells bad.
That never occurred to me, but you're right. You would think you would want to do that, but I think
that'd be the first thing I would do.
I think he's just stunned at the fact that it worked.
I would at least
because then when it comes back, like, it's like, yeah, it worked, but it's also just like, what the fuck is this?
Yeah,
I think,
and he just wants to be as far away from it as possible.
I think I can give you a good answer.
Yeah.
Church being reanimated conflicts with Lewis's worldview, and if he takes it to a vet, then he can no longer rationalize that, it was just stunned. It was stunned and it dug its way out, which he constantly rationalizes
Church's death and then engaged too. So I think that he probably subconsciously made a choice not to take it to the vet so he could continue to rationalize.
That's a good headcanon. I like that. But that's like, I would at least poke it with a stick more often.
And the other thing is just like there are a lot of differences between the various people and animals that have been reanimated through the Micmac burial ground, but the one thing they all share is that they permeate a sense of dread, and people want to avoid them. They want to avoid looking at them, thinking about them, being with them, and taking it to the vet and having it examined would be against that theme.
Yeah.
Okay, let's go to Rachel. I didn't think a whole lot about Rachel the first time I read this book. And I think on the second read, she was actually probably, if not my favorite character, one of my favorite characters. I think the first time I read this book, I was just like so embedded in Lewis's point of view that I was just like getting mad at Rachel for not being more rational about the situation. Like I got really pissed off at her for being such a bitch to him about the whole the argument they had about Ellie and the cat and the pet cemetery. And it took me a little bit to like get over that and start seeing things from her point of view. On the second read, I thought that everything she went through with Zelda and her parents, the fact that she's a functional adult in any amount says so much about her and her like personal strength. And I actually think she's one of the better developed characters that he's written.
I would agree. Like in general, like she's much more than the sum of her parts. And as far as like an actual like female role, I'm with you. Like as far as like, I don't mean to be that guy, but like most Stephen King female roles are kind of just like
Franny.
There's some really good ones,
but there's also some really
not good ones.
Yeah, where she kind of walks that line between like, I almost want to say like 70s wife. In a way, like she's got this kind, like the book kind of has this stigma of like her being like a stay-at-home mom to a degree, but the trauma that goes along with her makes her a much more deeper individual than what typical characters of her time frame would be, I think.
Yeah.
Because there's scars that go along with it, but the scars are also decently explained too. So like, yeah, she's fucked up, but she did to a very decent degree grow past the fucked up part of it to at least become a functioning parent to Ellie and Gage, in the fact that maybe she can't accept everything, but let's be honest, nobody's perfect.
Yeah. Daniel?
I thought she was a spoiled so...
Why?
That's awesome.
Well, the reason is she went through an extremely traumatic event, and so her father babied her every day past that to try to... Like, the reason she's a spoiled bitch is completely explained. But, like, she is very manipulative with her arguments. Lewis even comments on it in his head a couple of times of how this is what she says after she's already gotten her way, even though... like, logically, she knows that I'm probably right. I need to throw this fit, and if you talk back to me, I'm going to say you're screaming, and you're the bad guy. And that's how she always comes across to me. And she still did.
Yeah. I mean, that is true, but there's more to her than that.
Yeah.
I also feel like, to a degree, like, there is kind of... It's a tug and a toss, right? Like, there's parts of the book where she's like, she will apologize, saying... I went a little overboard, which to a degree...
But she only does that after she's gotten her way.
I agree. Like, if she wins the argument, then yes, that's when she goes back.
There's only actually one example of that happening, and I think that we're just getting Lewis's perspective on that.
Mm.
We are getting Lewis's perspective on that, so if you want to say that Lewis is an unreliable narrator, that's fine, but he references it as this is what she always does, and then he references it again when he says her dad's doing the same thing she always does. This is where she got.
The later part of the book kind of juxtaposes.
Well, because she doesn't do all that much.
The later part of the book
kind of
the later part of the book kind of juxtaposes that, because almost all of the first part of the book is entirely told from Lewis's perspective, and then when you start muddling in other people's perspectives, it kind of gets a little tangled. which is another problem I kind of had with the book.
Where it suddenly...
It's you're going to everybody else. And
when you weren't before.
Right.
Okay.
I don't think the latter half of the book would work unless you got some of Rachel and Judd's perspective. I mean, maybe you could have cut out Steve's bit.
Steve, I didn't get at all. Like, that just seems so
I think
weird
that
to
was
me.
just to add to the terror.
Yeah.
That was just, that's a stinger scene.
Yeah.
But I think Judd's bit and Rachel's bit is super necessary. But I mean,
I have thoughts, but I'll hold them.
I loved her. Like, she's not perfect, but it's very real.
Oh yeah, I think she's. I think she's fine. Like there's only two
She's very
characters.
real. She's every mother I've ever dated.
There's only two characters in this book that I really felt like were characters, and I feel like Rachel is a character.
Yeah.
Like, so I'll give her points on that. One. I understand her.
I will concede that she's a little better developed than Lewis, in that you don't learn as much about Lewis's backstory. You get some from his immediate life and from med school on, and then everything like pre that is mostly just talking about his interactions with his uncle, whereas you get a little bit more of a complete picture of Rachel. Granted, that's because she really has this one big defining thing that
Rachel also had real trauma. Not fake trauma, but Lewis had more common everyday trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Like a cousin suddenly dying. That's closer to what you experience in your everyday. You being left alone at what was she, like 8-10 years old or something?
8, I think.
Yeah.
And she wasn't even in junior high yet.
Mm-hmm.
To care for her spinal meningitis sister and then saw her die. That's more of an extreme kind of...
Saw her die, and in an attempt to save her, injured herself in a way that was relevant to her sister's pain and would cause her pain for years, that she would then associate with her sister's death and her being responsible for her sister. All right, church.
Scariest part of the book. There's just something about the way he described Church slinking around. I imagined him as kind of a cat that also slithered.
Yeah.
And that unnerved me. Like, not scared me, but like I'd see my cats walking around, and I'd swear every so often I'd watch my big Bombay black cat as it was coming like in through the living room when the lights were off. I'd see that little shimmer of the light from the other room where I'm just like, that fucking thing just slithered at me.
It's because I knew you were reading this book.
Yeah. I got way more attention by my cats when I was reading this book. That's a fact. I don't care if they say, no, you just noticed it more. No, fuck you. I got a bunch of cats coming into my room and won't leave me alone. Licking my webbing of my fingers. Fuck the doctor. Screw the Dr. Squatch. It happened.
They could taste the fear.
Yeah. It was just the description that got me with Church. Like, it was so earthy. If that makes... that sounds...
No, it does. I know what you're saying. I agree.
Yeah,
it's a funny way to put it, but it's true.
Yeah. Yeah, that's... Church was a very, like... That was probably, like, the thing that weirded me out the most as far as, like, parts of the book.
I don't have much to add. He was a spooky cat.
I don't think it's scarier than your son getting hit by a truck.
Yeah, I also don't think it's scarier than your son getting hit by a truck.
It's a point I intend to make later, but I feel like there's two very different kinds of fear in this book, and for me, I have a real big problem with separating the two.
I think that the strength of the book is that they're married.
I think it's a problem because of exactly that. Like, it's more my mental state of it. I'm trying to find a compelling point to throw this in, because I don't really want to throw that out super early, but that's up to you.
All right.
The overall reason I don't like this book is actually a lot of the narrative itself. And the way I can explain it, remember I said earlier, like, it's like a heartbeat method, where, like, you go up, 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 and then you're down again. And then you're up, 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 and then you hit that high point, and then the book ends. The biggest thing for me is, like, I have just apparently learned from this book that slow burn is just not for me.
I'm also not big on slow burn, but to me, like, this is the best one, like, hard stop period. So if you don't like this one, then yeah, probably not.
So the other big thing I had a lot of problems with this one is there is no suspense, I would argue.
I felt pretty suspended.
I did not.
That's the wrong adjective.
We are told way too.
were
we are told
suspended
way
from
too
that.
damn early that Gage is going to die. Way too early.
It's like halfway through the book.
It's not. They
It's
mention
the-
it a few times.
It's the kite. They don't mention it until the kite scene.
It's still early enough that it's spoiled kind of the suspense of it. It's like you already kind of know what's happening, and then when it happens, there's no suspense with it. You just know it happened.
That's not, so they don't say it until the end of the kite scene, and that's the end of part 1, and then the first sentence of part 2 is he's dead. So you don't actually find out he dies until it happens.
I just felt like there was a couple more instances of it.
I think that's just because it's such a well-known thing, like Darth Vader is Luke's father, that you're just... Because it literally does not say it until... Which is why...
So it's like a Mandela effect, like you've just kind of like... You've experienced it in some way, shape, or form, you just don't know it.
Yeah, like you can watch Empire Strikes Back for the first time, never seeing a Star Wars movie, but...
Okay.
But, didn't they say he was Luke's dad earlier? Like, it says...
People know the kid dies.
Yeah,
Okay.
like, so there's the last chapter of part 1 is where Lewis and Gage go out and fly the kite, and like the stinger at the end of that chapter is Gage had less than 2 months to live. That's the end of part 1, and then part 2 starts, and part 2 starts with Gage's funeral.
That could be the case. To me as a reader, I felt like I knew about that way too early. I don't remember the movie at all, to be fair. Like, consciously, I have no recollection of this movie. I know at some point I saw a piece of it.
But I mean, that's just a piece of pop culture that people know about. Like, we post memes about Gage getting hit by a truck on our page. Like,
I post that meme a lot.
it's just something that people know. Like,
And
they
maybe,
know.
and that's probably my own detriment, because throughout the rest of the book, that's how that was painted. I knew, in a weird way, early on, somehow I knew that this was a thing. I get to that point, and then the rest of the book, to me, is not only... I understand it's supposed to be depressing, but it's depressing to the point where I'm just disinterested.
That's fair.
Yeah, that's a lot of the colic.
I think this book is so dark and dismal that there's a population, a percentage of readers that are just never going to get past that and enjoy it.
It's unrelentingly morose.
Yes.
And you're either on board with that or you're not going to be. So
Exactly. So I would not criticize someone for not liking this book because it's sad and depressing, because it is. It does not make you feel good.
No.
There are very few happy moments in this book.
There are high points of this book. Like, there's stuff, like, there's the parts of this book where I was genuinely like, okay, I'm on board. I like this. But I just had reading this book, I would say to me, 80% of it was just, I was completely just disinterested. That's a lot of the problem I had with the book. Now, those last 50 pages, when you get to them, again, there's all this build-up. So even if you're disinterested, there's still a build-up there. Mm-hmm. So when you get to them, I wasn't ready for any of it. When you get to those last 50, you're sitting there being like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
Like, it still fucking whaps you in the side of the head. So that's my soapbox, I guess.
That's completely fair, completely understandable.
Fair enough.
Like,
Okay.
I'm surprised you read the whole thing.
I like to commit.
Yeah.
In my
Yeah.
He believes in finishing what he started.
I do 100%.
It's how I was able to bully him into jelly beans.
Yeah. That was the old me. Now the new me is all about, if I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it.
Yeah. I felt I at least owed it to the show and you guys to at least finish the book and give, like, I can't not give an honest opinion if I don't see or experience the whole thing.
A 2-year-old who gets hit by a car and nothing good happens. Like, if somebody read that and said, this is sad and I didn't like it, I would never be like, what's the matter with you? I think it's more likely that there's something the matter with me for liking the book.
Exactly.
But the book, to me, this book has a discussion. That's what that is the biggest thing about this book. There's a lot to discuss.
I guess let's move on to Judd. I think
he's my favorite old man.
I think Stephen King, not protagonists, he might be like my favorite Stephen King character. Like, of like adjacent protagonists, he's...
Don't want to go down that road.
That road.
Yeah. I liked him a lot. I liked his segues in the books. Those were the parts that kind of kept me invested. Because there were like every part of his sections of the books to me were just like very fascinating. Even if it isn't like necessarily related to like the plot, it's just the extra little stuff that we get. Like he is the world building.
Yeah.
And I think that's why I liked it so much. There's so much world building in it, other things going on, and Judd is like the small bit of world building we get.
Yes.
I loved my wife. Every once in a while, I just get the urge to go to a whorehouse.
He is an asshole.
You just want to. I think he says like you want to put it in some unfamiliar flesh.
He does.
Something
he
like
says
that.
exactly that.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which
it's just the weirdest way to phrase sex.
They'll do things for you that you can't bring yourself to ask your wife to do.
All right, between all three of us, do we think that Gage was right and Norma fucked others?
100%.
Yeah.
Okay.
I hate it, but yeah.
I'm also on board.
I 100% believe that that's the reason it bothered him so much and distracted him just enough.
I think you could rationalize it and say that Gage is making shit up to make him mad, but I think it makes more sense, especially with the Timmy Baterman story.
I do
think if they know about Zelda, there's no reason they wouldn't worry about that.
Mm-hmm. I do think it's probably more complicated than it lets on. Like, she knew about the whorehouses, so she rationalized it herself. Well, if he's sleeping with other people, why can't I do it?
I agree with that.
It's how cheating spirals happen.
Again, I think it happened just because, like, the premise is that this thing already knows about Zelda and existing. If it already knows about Zelda and that's never been spoken to anything other than Rachel, who has never actually experienced this thing before, there is no reason to think that it can't do the same thing to Judd.
Yeah.
Somehow they still had a 60-year-long marriage and had it,
Life is more complicated than black and white.
One of my least favorite stand-up comedians,
Lewis Black.
No, Dane Cook.
Oh God, he does suck.
He has
I've never watched one.
He has this whole
you're doing good.
bit where he talks about this old married couple, his grandpa, and how he was with them when they were getting their wedding photos or their anniversary photos taken, and his grandpa just leans over and kisses her on the cheek, and he's like, and I saw my grandma light up like she was a little girl again, and it was the most beautiful thing. I'm like, Granddad, how do you make a love last this long? And Granddad leaned over and whispered in my ear, cheat. And that's what it's not funny. He's not a funny comedian, but that bit reminds me of this every time I read this book.
My headcanon is that they both cheated on each other when they were younger, and maybe even the first 40 years.
Yeah, and it's just something like he probably did it because he wanted to do some weird sex shit, and it's back in the 19 whatevers.
He was born in 1900.
Yeah, so he's like, how do you go up to your wife and ask her for butt stuff? Like, he doesn't know.
Yeah.
But then she finds out about it because she's not stupid.
Yeah.
And then she's like, well, if he's doing that, then I'm just gonna fuck the guy that comes on to me, and that's how these spirals always happen.
Honestly, the thing that I found most offensive about her cheating wasn't the fact that she actually cheated on him, was the fact that Gage says that they would laugh at him.
Laugh about it.
Yeah. That's the part that was really disturbing to me. But I try not to let that dominate my view of Judd and Norma, because I really think they're great.
Yeah. Like everything else in this book, it's super complicated.
Yeah.
So
I mean, they're like Lewis and like Rachel. They're real people, and they've done bad things and they've done good things. They just happen to make it work for whatever reason.
Most of these characters in this book, especially, they're, again, I said earlier, I don't think a whole lot of them are characters in the sense.
Rachel and
Judd are about the only two. But again, Rachel, I understand from a scarred point of view to a degree, and Judd is that world building also character that I just kind of operate under the assumption that while he's not a perfect character, in fact most of the stuff that is explained about him shows he's not a perfect person, but characters like that are ones I tend to remember.
He's also, at the end of his life where he's done a lot of this shit as a younger man, and now he's getting to reflect on it, and he's probably like, maybe I shouldn't have seen all those holes.
Yes.
Maybe I should have seen like 2 less.
Yeah.
Maybe I could have asked Norma for butt stuff.
Yeah. Like Judd a lot. Probably up there as one of my favorite side characters in any of the books.
Also, my limited experience, I've known a few dudes who have cheated on their significant others, and they all seem to regret it, and I'm always like, why'd you do it? I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Same when I ate 3 cinnamon rolls, and I regretted it.
It felt really good at the time.
Why did I do it?
Yeah. I've also done really stupid shit. I understand. It's
just part of being human.
Hindsight's 20/20, and it's just hard to everybody justification is the word to me. Everybody justifies it differently. When sometimes really what you just need to say to yourself is just like, yeah, it was not a good decision, and I was not a good person for making that decision. Yeah, I fucked up.
I'm real.
Yeah. It happens. I get it.
But yes, I love Judd.
Yeah. And I think it kind of adds to his and Norma's relationship, that because a lot of the long-lasting relationships in IRL, as the kids say, are people who are people who have both fucked up, but came to terms with it with each other. Through communication.
I can't believe
compromise.
this book gave me a chance to talk about fucking a Dane Cook stand-up.
I like how that's the high point for you.
The Goldmans. I hated them the first time. I'm a little more sympathetic on the second read. Daniel, you go before Half Talks.
I hate him so much. Who's the mom? Dory?
Dory.
Finding Dory.
She doesn't really amount to much in my head. She seems like that... What would you even call it? The background wife? Someone who married...
Seen but not heard.
Yeah. That's what she strikes me of as a character. And I'm like, okay, well, she did marry this kind of well-off dude, and they do talk a lot about how they are country kind of club people. So I get that. Every problem I have with Rachel stems from both of them. So I understand where it comes from. The only thing I can fathom is, well, I wonder what their trauma was. But the book doesn't give you anything, so all I can go off of is they're fucking horrible people.
Their daughter.
Yeah.
That was trauma.
Yeah. Okay.
I would imagine that your daughter dying in your house is pretty traumatic.
What trauma led them to going, our 8-year-old daughter can watch the girl? That's what I'm asking.
That was just a dumb decision.
That's what I'm saying. That alone is so profoundly stupid to me that I cannot be sympathetic towards them.
So here's what was my thing. So my first read, he's the devil. He can. My second read, like I said, the first time I was just all in Lewis's head and I couldn't think about really any other characters. This read, I'm thinking more about Rachel. I'm thinking more about Erwin and their perspectives. This was my thought process. Is that I don't like Erwin. He's terrible, but I saw the problem between him and Lewis as more of a two-way street, and that's because so when I met Beck's family, it did not go really well.
Yeah,
at all. To the point where we weren't allowed to see each other for a straight 9 months. It got better because both sides made an effort. I made an effort, her dad made an effort, and we're on pretty good terms now. We're on really good terms now. We have a pretty good relationship. When I said I was sympathetic of Erwin, what I maybe should have said is I was more critical of Lewis because he doesn't try at all.
You're right, he does not try. And it's like... It's not like there's a lack of opportunities for trying either. But he had this one... He probably had multiple really bad experiences, but he always harps on that one really bad experience, I'm going to pay you to not see my daughter.
Yeah.
And he uses that as almost all of his excuses to not try, which is my big criticism for men.
And it was really, really relatable to me because, there's the Thanksgiving trip where he doesn't go when he could have gone. He could have gone to Thanksgiving at their house.
It's called FaceTime.
Yeah. But he doesn't. And that was a lot of
Did you make a FaceTime reference in 1983?
No, like...
you put in FaceTime with people.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
before
All
it was
right.
an app, that was an expression.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
I'm
sorry.
old.
I'm sorry.
If you got to put in FaceTime with people to build a relationship. But when Beck moved down here and we had the kids, like a lot of summers she would go back up and spend a couple weeks with her parents, and I often wouldn't go.
Yeah.
Just because, I'm going to work or I'm going to do whatever. But
Skyrim just came out.
yeah, Skyrim. That's very true. But things started getting better when I started going and started making an effort, and so
I actually had a pretty good relationship with my in-laws when I was
your
married.
in-laws are awesome.
Yeah.
I only knew them for a couple days, and they were very nice.
Yeah, they were always super nice to me.
Yeah.
The only thing that ended that relationship was when I sent her mom all the messages about her daughter cheating on me.
Yeah.
So-
I can only imagine why she didn't like that.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, she called me a liar, so I was like, here's all of your daughter's messages.
Well,
So I was
it's
mad.
hard to see your own child villainized.
Yeah.
But I would imagine, one, they were just nice people, and two, they wanted their daughter to have a stable relationship, and they saw you as a way to that.
Yeah. They were always super. I still hope for the best for at least those two.
Yeah.
They were always really nice guys. But you have to make an effort. Like, I would always go up to the family events with them, even though I was working night shifts. I was always tired.
Yeah.
The Goldwins are an example of how Lewis is a very stubborn person.
Yeah.
Men can be super bullheaded.
Yes. Saying I was sympathetic towards them wasn't exactly right, but it's not just their fault.
Yeah. I do think they're shitty people.
They are. Leaving your 8-year-old daughter alone with your other dying daughter there's no rationale for that.
And Lewis even says, like, you guys weren't poor back then. You could have afforded an RN.
But there's also a point where Rachel says at the same time that they were actually losing a lot of money and his store was doing really poorly at that point in time.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what the impression Rachel was under. I don't know. But
Yeah.
either way, even if they really couldn't afford a nurse, they shouldn't have left her alone.
Yeah.
Or at least one of them should have went out and one of them should have stayed. One of them should have taken Rachel and went out and gotten Rachel out of the house for a while.
Yeah.
And they could have even said, okay, Dory, you take Rachel to this house and this house, come back, switch with me, and I'll take Rachel and I'll go to this house and this house. Like, there's a million better ways to have done it.
And on the Goldwins, Zelda's death is probably my second favorite part of this book.
It's so horrific.
I ran outside and I was screaming and everyone thought I was crying, but Lewis, I think I was laughing. I love that story.
I think it's one of his best, if not his best, subplots.
Yeah.
It's up there. It's horrific.
Hef, tell us about the Goldwins.
I think the Goldwins are a good interpretation of toxicity bleeds.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's a great phrase.
I mean, it's you all said basically everything in the stuff that you do. Like, there's not a lot for me to say on it because really, it's the perfect encapsulation of everybody sucks to a degree, and we just want to think we're doing our best with what we have, and sometimes what our best is just not good. Period.
Yeah.
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 And Erwin Goldman, like, to a degree, Erwin Goldman is kind of like, it's a perfect balance between him and the Lewis, like, character. Because Lewis, the one thing I remember the most is probably the funeral. Lewis is just trying to hold it all together. He's trying to be his clinical doctor self, trying to keep everything in motion, everything in its perfect little order. It's the one last bastion of things he has. And Erwin Goldman is just not having it.
That was the worst.
Not having it at all. And that's the breaking point. It's just like this man who has just he's been butted heads with all the time. But to me as well, it really shows the level of, like, character that it's trying to encompass and level of grief it's trying to encompass, because by the end of that fight they're both on the floor crying. They just can't deal with the fact that this is actually happening, and they're not even really mad at each other. They're just completely destroyed by the situation.
I honestly think that if it weren't for the whole burial ground thing, that probably would have been the start of them of their the healing for them.
Yeah. See, what irritated me is, like, I shouldn't say irritated, because, again, it's supposed to be a toxic relationship. That's the point of it. But later on in the book, when, like, Lewis sends them to, you know, to go with the
Chicago,
right, and he's just like sitting there being just like, "You've made the right decision, Lewis. You know, I was wrong. Like, I'm reading that as just being like, you fucking twat.
So,
but I understand it too. Like, there is a duality here, and Irwin Goldwyn is basically, to me, not to interrupt, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Yeah, Irwin Goldwyn to me is basically like, it's the classic, this is your husband, this is your father. To a degree, there's a relative similarity between the two of them that neither of them want to agree on. And that's kind of the big tug of war for me, is Irwin Goldwyn is essentially an older, more scarred Lewis. And to me, that makes him less of a villain and more of just a guy who just was on the wrong side of a decision.
Sympathetic was the wrong word. Maybe understand. Maybe not
Empathetic.
quite. Yeah, it's like you understand the character. You don't agree with or like the character, but you get it.
You've met people like Irwin at one point or another.
Empathetic is understanding. Sympathetic is relating to.
Right.
I have to like tattoo that on my arm because I can never remember.
Yeah, it's always
Only reason I remember is my useless psychology degree.
But I feel like we've all met an Irwin, which is basically, in this book, it's supposed to be like somebody who just disagrees with you just to do it.
I'll kill you all! I'll drive you crazy, and I'll kill you all! I'm every nightmare you ever had. I am your worst dream come true. I'm everything you ever were afraid of.
Okay, scary shit. Where we talk about what is scary and what is not. Daniel, why is this book... Well, I'm sorry. I shouldn't assume. Daniel, is this book scary to you?
It's the most terrifying book I've ever read.
I completely agree.
Yeah.
For you, why is it scary?
Whenever I was a stepdad, I couldn't finish Cujo because I always pictured the little boy as my stepson. Same thing with this book. It's very good at putting you in that perspective of, hey, what if this was your kid in this exact same spot? What would you do in that situation? But then you also got how I called it, the perfect slow burn, where you got the sprinkle of the supernatural around, and all I want in my life is to experience something truly supernatural.
I like this.
But I'm so afraid it will be this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to see a Wendigo or some shit.
I want something more like a Goosebumps book.
I'm going to...
Killer eggs from Mars.
That would be better.
I'm going to want...
I want Shaun of the Dead, but I'm going to get Pet Cemetery.
Yeah, something like
I
that.
want Shaun of the Dead, but I got Hot Fuzz.
I wanted Resident Evil, I got Silent Hill.
I love Hot Fuzz, by the way. That's my comfort movie.
It's good.
It has no right to be as good as it is.
Even, like, just church. The idea of, like, how I said, like, I would be prodding it with a stick, but that would still terrify me. I would still do it. I would still experiment on the thing, but the idea of something dead just showing back up. I also have these pervasive nightmares where there's just dead bodies buried in my backyard.
There are dead bodies buried in your backyard.
Yeah, but they're people in my dreams.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And in my dream, it's always one of my parents help me bury somebody.
Oh.
And every time, sometimes I just look out my backyard and I'm like, do I need to start digging?
Dig, 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 diggity, dig, dig, dig. And I've already said it. Like, to me, the number one thing I'm afraid of is my son being hit by a car. Not even close. And the scariest things to me are things that marry a real fear. You getting hit by a car with something supernatural. And this is almost the best example. Other really good examples are Cujo, and The Shining is also up there. All right, Hef, you thought the cat was scary. Were there other things you found scary?
So this was, I kind of referenced this earlier where I said, like, the distinction between real life fear and supernatural fear, right? So this is, I understand what you're saying as far as like the book marries the two. It basically infuses them all into one. It infuses them both into one core story, which it does. I will not disagree with that. As a reader, the biggest problem I had with that is distinguishing the two, which I realize they're infused, but it was really hard for me to not have very different reactions to two very different kinds of fear. As a parent, obviously Gage's death is like the peak thing you just... Because that's not even a fear of just death. That's a fear of you have to live without your child, which as a parent, I don't think anybody really wants to sit there and think about life without their child.
Nope.
It's too morbid, it's too real, it's too... It's too possible.
Yeah.
That's the most fear-driven thing that you could have as a parent.
Rachel, as a doctor, I know that anything could happen to us. Anything.
And yet you don't. And that's the big thing of the book. Which makes the supernatural parts of it almost alien to me. Like the whole parts where he's going into, like you said, the void between the cemetery and then the deadfall. Mm-hmm. The Wendigo kind of like tromping around doing this. These in this novel, as I'm reading it, compared with the just dismal depression that is the rest of the book, it just feels like I'm reading two completely different novels. It's like I'm trying to read something that is innately supernatural and something that is uncomprehendable to the human mind, while also trying to read about Lewis and how his mind is literally trying to do exactly that with the fact that his son has died. So we have this weird blend of like, I can't conceive this, so I'm just not going to think about it. But we also have this thing of like, if I don't try to conceive this and contemplate and understand that my son is dead, then I'm going to go crazy. And it to me, it was a very big tug of war.
Yeah, it just sounds like it didn't work for you.
No.
Whereas that's what I love
that's
about
like the best part.
That's the best part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what
I guess
love.
if it didn't work for you, I can't convince you if it didn't work.
To me, that doesn't mean that there aren't still some very disturbing things. And this book does make you think. There's not a single part of this book where I wasn't thinking. It just wasn't for me.
Yeah,
Quite simply.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I mean, if we've learned nothing, we've learned that, we like different things.
Mm-hmm.
What is the scariest moment in the book?
It's after Church dies. And it is Judd's reason for showing Lewis the burial ground. His reason was simply because he had to share the secret.
Yeah,
no other reason.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
No other reason.
He gives some other reasons, but those are rationalizations.
Right. And he outwardly admits, he said, it's just this thing where I could not keep it to myself.
Right.
That's all.
Aside from just Gage getting hit by the truck, I think the most haunting and scary moment to me is right at the beginning, where I think it's the first day they move in, or it's one of the first days, where Lewis is walking up the stairs and just has this terrible premonition that something very bad is going to happen, and then forgets that until it's too late. When he had warnings, Victor warned him, "Doctor, do not cross the barrier," which, okay,
it's hard for me to narrow one down
because there's so many.
Ellie's dreams freak me out because anytime a kid has a nightmare that feels too real, I get freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
The ending where like gravel is falling out of Rachel's mouth fucking gets me.
Ugh.
God, what was
darling? It wouldn't be darling. It would be darling.
And oh God, what was Lewis's friend's name again? Steven?
Steve.
Yeah. Whenever like he almost crosses the barrier and then he almost feels as if something just kind of lets him go. Like, nah, I don't want to play with you. Just like the idea that something like again,
that it has a choice.
Area. We really, really need to read Dark Tower.
Yeah. Just like, nah, I'm done.
I'm done playing with you.
Yeah, I'm gonna keep playing with Lewis.
That's on my list. Like that's next after The Hobbit this year. I'm reading my next book. I just finished Pet Sematary. The Hobbit's on my docket.
I think
right
I'm gonna
now.
go
Nice.
with the. I think I'm gonna go with the ending.
Hobbit's my all-time favorite book.
I have never read any of them. And
Start with The Hobbit.
I have determined that fantasy is not really my strength when it comes to reading, but I intend to try to change that.
Well, this might be Ralph.
I'm gonna try.
Game of Thrones.
It's also not. I've tried Game of Thrones. I've read 4 volumes of Game. I read 4 books of Game of Thrones, and then I got to the 4th book, and I'm like, oh, this is all the King's Landing shit.
We've had this before.
I don't give a fuck about this.
We've had this exact discussion.
Yep.
Yeah. No. But Hobbit also seems like 200 pages, 200 some pages. That doesn't seem bad.
I'm sure. I think you will do well with The Hobbit. The Hobbit is significantly easier to read than The Lord of the Rings.
I'll take it. Yeah. The Dark Tower is after that.
Oh, so good. It's so good.
The power of Christ compels you! The power of Christ compels you!
So the power of Christ compels you. Not a huge discussion. Just obviously the resurrection of Christ, and more so, the story of Lazarus.
He had to say Lazarus, or everyone in the graveyard would have gotten up.
I want to see that story.
Yeah.
Oh shit! I was supposed to say Lazarus. Ah, Jesus, you fucked it up.
I would love to write a story about Jesus who doesn't know how to control his powers. like he goes to
He's
share,
like a Miles Morales Christ.
yeah. So like he goes to like split the
There's
bread
way
and the
more
fishes,
bread than I
and then
thought
he
there
makes
was going to be.
he makes too much bread.
No, he's trying to make wine, but he really just makes this super acidic grape juice that burns people's tongues.
Or he makes wine in inappropriate situations because he wants to impress his friends.
And
He accidentally fills a person with wine, like instead of their blood, and then all of a sudden they're just...
Person is 70% water. Oh yeah, we'll become 70% party.
he tries to walk on water and almost drowns.
Oh my god, are you Stephen King? No, I'm Dean Koontz. Oh.
Kings and Koontz, we're finally to the wind down portion. What is your king for Pet Sematary?
Honestly, my king for this book is that it is just starkly darker than every book by Stephen King I've read up to this point. Going in with the mentality that I did, like, the one thing I can say about this book that I did enjoy is it does prey on the stigma of Stephen King being kind of a dark writer.
Mm-hmm.
Because if this is what you start with, that is absolutely what you get.
I wouldn't, unless your goal in reading Stephen King is to purely have the pants scared off you, I would not recommend this as your first Stephen King book.
I agree. But that's also why I feel like it's a standout.
Yeah.
I also think it's so morose that if you read this one and you think that that's what all his books are like, you'll be discouraged.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you really like... Some people really like the morose.
Yeah, and I do to a point.
For me, it's like a treat.
Yeah,
it's like I can sprinkle my horror ice cream with morose.
I need mostly happy endings, but I need one of these on occasion.
I'll take the occasional Dean Koontz optimism, but I can't have it every night.
Not that happy.
Yeah.
I want that even less than I want this. My king is actually the prose and the quotes, and like the marriage of the real fear and the supernatural fear is a very close second. But it's the quotes in this book like get me more than like any other of his books, and actually I think my favorite one.
It is very quotable. Like there's some really good lines in this book.
It obviously, sometimes dead is better is huge, and the soil of a man's heart is stonier. A man grows what he can and tends it. Those are probably the two most iconic ones. But the one that like haunts me is the old sleep poorly. Perhaps they stand watch.
That's why I'm gonna die young.
Die young and leave an ugly corpse. That's what I say. Give me another box of Twinkies.
Closed casket.
So yeah, that's my king. Daniel?
Just that it's the perfect example of a slow burn.
It is.
Can't think of anything that does it better. In fact, I think everything that tries to do it better ends up being demonstrably worse.
Near Koontz. F.
That for most of the book, I was genuinely uninterested.
I had a sneaking suspicion that you wouldn't like this book, but not in my wildest dreams did I think uninterested would be the word. But that's okay.
Yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah. As I see him burning with rage in his heart.
we can't all... If being a Star Wars fan has taught me nothing, it has taught me that we can't all like the same things. And if you only try to be friends with people who like the exact same things that you do, you're going to be a lonely person.
That's very bold of you. Most people can settle for way less.
I mean, I spent 10 years arguing with people about the prequel trilogies and trilogy, and now we're at the sequel trilogy, and it's just like, you know what?
Same deal.
I'm not doing this twice.
I'm not doing this twice.
That's fair.
If you didn't like it, that's cool. Check out The Mandalorian. You probably like that.
I do like The Mandalorian.
Yeah. Daniel, go ahead and give yours, because mine has a little bit of a tangent with it.
God, I'm really hard-pressed to even think of a Koontz for this book. I like this book
honestly,
so
for the majority of the time I was rereading this, I was just going to say I don't have a Koontz.
Yeah.
And I have one, but it's very nitpicky-ish.
I don't like the Goldwins as people.
Yeah, but you wouldn't, like, change it.
I
mean,
also wouldn't change it.
Yeah,
so.
because, I mean, that conflict adds to the drama of the book.
Norma cheating, that is my Koontz.
Yeah, that is just like... Oh, it's just the turd on the turd Sunday.
It's depressing.
Yeah.
But it's also so real. Like so much of this.
Okay, so... And I wouldn't change this, because I can't improve on Stephen King. But this is something that bothered me a little bit on the second read. To me, the fact that Lewis buries Gage in the Micmac burial ground is scarier and more haunting if, in my head, the Micmac spirits are played down just a little bit and he has a choice. Like, he wants to do it, he chooses to do it, and the Micmac spirits are just, like, encouraging that choice. So that's how it was in my head. Like, oh, okay, he wants to do it. It's not like they're forcing him, but he's choosing to do it, and they're just, like, fanning that flame to get him to the point where he will actually do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the fact that within an hour of Rachel dying and Gage dying, he then takes Rachel and buries her in the Micmac burial ground, I think that destroys that headcanon of mine, and that's almost proof that Lewis has no choice and that the Micmac spirits are just forcing him to do things, and by eliminating that choice, it makes it less scary to me. I wouldn't change it because I think reanimating Rachel in the ending is perfect. Like, I think that's how you end the book.
Yeah.
But I wish my headcanon could be that Lewis has a little bit more of a choice in doing so, because that makes it scarier to me personally.
For me, he had a choice up until a point. That's how I always rationalized it, is that the place is growing in power,
Mm-hmm.
and after Gage, now it's beyond the point of no return.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
Maybe he had a choice.
And that's like why his hair turns white. And
he had a choice with Gage, but he
never had a choice. After that, it was too powerful.
You fucked up. Yeah. Yeah. That's fair. That's good. Okay. You know what? I don't have a Koontz.
You're welcome.
Book is perfect. Okay. Zombie Day. Lots of Stephen King references. Cujo is referenced right at the beginning. That's St. Bernard down in Castle Rock tore up all them people. The Penobscot River, which is the river that flows through Derry, is mentioned. And Derry is mentioned 4 or 5 times. Smucky the cat is buried in the pet cemetery, and Smucky was Stephen King's, Naomi King's cat that was the origin of this book.
He was obedient.
And the line, "all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy," is a reference to
Shining.
The Shining, obviously.
I almost forgot.
Bangor Airport is mentioned several times, and Bangor Airport, the majority of the Langoliers takes place.
Oh.
Mount Hope Cemetery is where who is buried?
Jesus.
Georgie Dembro.
Jesus.
Obviously.
Or Miles Morales Jesus. He couldn't get past the boulder.
Fund it. Jerusalem's Lot is mentioned, and it's a very haunting little piece that I really enjoyed. Who names the town Jerusalem's Lot? No, it's actually Cthulhu worshippers.
Huh.
Zelda peering out of the drain while Rachel is in the tub reminded me of Pennywise.
Yeah.
And then just a non-Stephen King reference, but at the end of chapter 20, Lewis references Walpurgis Night, which is actually the night that the short story Dracula's Guest by Bram Stoker takes place on, which we reviewed.
And you guys should check out. It's one of our better ones.
Yeah.
It's not 5 hours long.
No, it's like 40-ish minutes, and we discuss Walpurgis Night, so that's cool. Homework. I have 2 prompts, one for each of you. Hef, here's your prompt. So I'm going to give it to you, and then you just have to go. And you have to be like me and be like, oh, blah, blah.
Okay. Use my hands.
Yeah.
Right.
John Hammond moves to Ludlow. Go.
John Hammond is the guy who made the dinosaurs in Jurassic Park?
He's the guy who operates the park. Yeah, I don't think he was a scientist, but
Okay.
he's the old guy from Jurassic Park, yeah.
And he moves to Ludlow.
He moves to Ludlow. It's at Jurassic Park fails, and he's like, I want to focus on my family. I'm going to take my family. I'm going to move up to Maine. That's
all right. So he moves to Maine and meets Judd. Judd decides that this man is far too interesting to not talk to, so they start talking about his very cool stick, which has the little fly in it, or the little mosquito in it.
Yeah.
And his mosquito, he's just like, that's real cool right there. He said, you want to know what's really cool? There's also this place I can take you to bring that sucker back to life.
I hate how creative this was.
Let's walk across the road.
So they go through the void, and John Hammond is just like, all right, and he just takes the thing off his stick, puts it in there, and then they bury it. Next day, his fun little mosquito comes back to him. John Hammond is completely fascinated by it, like, my God, this is great. What if I could do more with it? But only he can't do more with it, because with that one mosquito, there has come thousands of mosquitoes, and now we just have another one of the 10 plagues of Egypt kind of scenario in the town of Ludlow.
Of zombie mosquitoes.
Resurrected.
Daniel. Ellie Creed, grief-stricken by the loss of her family, is looking for support. She cannot find it at home with her grandparents because they're just too... Yeah, they're her grandparents. And she meets another little girl with psychic powers by the name of Charlie McGee.
Okay.
The two of them form a fast friendship and eventually meet an older girl with psychic powers by the name of Carrie White.
Okay.
Go.
They make fun of her for being the weakest of the trio. They're like, how's it feel to be the bronze medal?
Ellie is the weakest?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought you were saying Carrie
no.
was the weakest.
They're like, hey, Ellie, how's it feel to only get dream visions? Watch me, I can control the sun. And it turns into a parody of Mean Girls.
Oh, I was kind of imagining like a psychic Charlie's Angels super team. But you know what? Don't ask if you don't want to hear the answer.
I just like Mean Girls.
Yeah. I'd need to watch it. I haven't watched it. I do like Mean Girls without like Mean Girls though. Question for the listeners: is there a beloved pet from your past that you would bury in the Micmac burial ground?
Did you not have homework?
No.
You didn't come up with a question for yourself.
How could I do that? I mean, fine, give me something on the spot.
I can't. You win.
Okay. Let's assume you're Hef in this situation, and you read this book and were completely unfascinated by the fact that you got through it, and you had to come to Ryan's house and tell Ryan you were unfascinated by the book. How would you cope with that?
I just wouldn't do it. I'd say, hey guys, you know what? I didn't really like this book. You guys have fun. I'll catch you on the next one. It's my whole thing. Like a little bit about me is I tend to stick with things regardless if I like them or not. To the extreme, to the fact where I got a teaching degree when I had no interest in being a teacher. So something I'm trying to change about myself is that if I don't like what I'm doing, I'm going to stop doing it and fuck the maybe not fuck the consequences, but like if I was reading this book and I didn't like it, I would stop.
Allow me to boomerang. I, on the opposite spectrum, have been very non-committal to things over my lifetime, and I have found that in my adult years, I like committing to things and finishing them because I like the idea that at least I walked away a little bit more knowledgeable than when I walked in.
Yeah, that's very fair, and that has been my motto and my belief the majority of my life. I need to recognize that I don't have to finish every single thing I start.
And I need to recognize that sometimes commitment needs to be a little less committed than what it actually is.
I just want to fuck Norma.
Sounds like you could have your chance. You just got to bury her at the pet cemetery.
We've learned a lot tonight.
Yeah,
I think I'm going to skip the gym.
I knew you would. Because you're rationalizing you're a human being and blah, 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 blah.
Well, shit, did we rank?
No, we skipped it.
We did not.
It's my number 2.
It's my number 1.
I thought hard about making it my number 1, but the truth is just there are things in it that are just more my speed. I think Pet Sematary is probably the better written book, but I enjoy it more.
Is it above River of Teeth?
Surely it's better than above.
It's 100% above River of Teeth.
Is it above Phantoms?
Ironically, the biggest fight I had with this particular book was, is it better than the Abraham Lincoln book? It's between The Mist and Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, thank God.
The reason that because I don't like it as much as the other ones. That's just a fact.
That's fine.
However, Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter just had some crucial things, such as the vampires, that I didn't like about the vampire hunting book.
Yeah.
Whereas at least with Pet Sematary, I can still say that the premise and there are just certain points of this book that made me think. There is not a single goddamn point in Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter that really made me think far past. It's a mockumentary.
I love that book when I read it when I was like 20.
Yeah.
And when I read it last year, it was just like, wow, I really like this book.
Yeah, the irony is now that upon looking at my list, I'm pretty sure Phantoms needs to go above it.
Well, we can't change the list.
I know.
I think we should be allowed to change the list like once a year.
Yeah.
We can do
on
that
the
on
anniversary
the
episode.
There are parts of Phantoms that I enjoy so much more. But it's just those singular bad points are just so bad.
I have Phantoms over Abraham Lincoln, don't I? Yeah, I do. Phantoms is my number 12. Abraham Lincoln is my number 16.
Yeah. Remind me in a year. We'll talk about it again.
We'll reevaluate our... for further reading, if you want to read more Stephen King books that marry the supernatural and the real, I really recommend Cujo and The Shining. The Monkey's Paw is one of my all-time favorite short stories, regardless of horror or whatever. It's really good. And Pet Sematary borrows from The Monkey's Paw heavily. We will do an episode on The Monkey's Paw, and we will do an episode on the Treehouse of Horror Monkey's Paw, where Homer gets a monkey's paw.
How many donuts does he wish for?
Well, I'll tell you this. It ends with him giving the monkey's paw to Flanders. And, well... Okay.
It's Jesus' hand.
I also, if you enjoy this, I also recommend The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones.
Yes.
For 2 reasons. One, it's also a really good slow burn horror novel, and it also is even more so heavily influenced by indigenous American culture and is written by an indigenous American author. I am reading right now The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood. I started it yesterday.
You're on a Wendigo kick.
I'm on a Wendigo kick. I don't know what I think of this book so far. but it has to do with the Wendigo. So if that's what you're all about, then check out The Wendigo by Algernon Blackwood. Because I'm reading it now, and he's given H.P. Lovecraft a run for his money in the racism department. And I was not super surprised when I Googled Algernon Blackwood and saw that he was one of H.P. Lovecraft's major influences. His name is also the Until Dawn is in the Blackwoods, which is named for Algernon Blackwood. Yeah. All right,
I'll have to read that.
It's fun. If you get like a Lovecraft, just get past the racism. Upcoming on the Horror of Babylon, and this next Sunday we are going to review the first Pet Sematary film, and Grampus will be back for that. The next Thursday we are going to review the short story The Boogeyman by Stephen King, which I think is one of his scariest things. I'll tell you, it also involves children dying. Ugh.
That's the best part.
Yeah, and then we'll get to have a bit of a lighter episode on June 4th with Pet Sematary 2.
Yeah.
Where we'll talk about Clancy Brown being a drunken maniac. And then...
Love Clancy Brown.
He's so great.
He is.
The following week, we'll get to see the new movie, The Boogeyman, and I'm thinking it's going to be terrible, but the short story is such a favorite that we have to review it. And
I liked the trailer.
I didn't. I don't think you'll like the trailer after you read the story. But we'll see. We'll see. Maybe we'll do our episode, and then we'll watch the trailer again, and maybe you'll be like, Ryan, you're wrong, and this, and I'll be like, oh yeah, you're right. Horror movie senpai, notice me. And then speaking of terrible, we will do the Pet Sematary remake, and then after that, we're going to do the Treehouse of Horror Ring and Treehouse of Horror Blob, and we'll wrap up Blob and Ring coverage. And yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you to our patrons, Abigail the First, Breaker of Change, Mother of Dragons, and
Logan,
the Full Metal Patron. And special thank you to Horsemen Comics and Gaming, which you can visit at the Morgantown Mall, Morgantown, West Virginia, North Mall, Robinson, and Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and say hello to the #1 Denise Crosby fan in the world, Ronald III, Grampus of Christmas, worshipper of Tasha Yar, even when she's just a big old black puddle of muck laying on that planet whose name I don't remember.
Was alive in the 70s.
Thank you both, especially you, Hef, for trudging through the deeply uninteresting book we read.
I would do it for the boys every time.
You're a better man than me.
No, I'm not.
And thank you both for staying up till 2 in the morning to record.
I'm up until 8 a.m. every night, so.
I am not. My bedtime was like 3 hours ago.
I'm sorry.
I also have very few friends.
Yeah, me too. Me too. All right, stay tuned for our socials and stay scary.
Stay scary, everybody.
Stay scary, folks.
And now for the obligatory socials. Please like, share, and subscribe. Follow Daniel at DStarSick on Twitter. Follow Ryan at Darth Daimyo on the Bluebird app. You can find the podcast on Twitter at HorrorPod69. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Slasher, and Goodreads. Become part of the Disturbed community by asking for the Facebook group and Discord links. Send dick pics to the Horror of Babylon podcast at gmail.com. Support the show at patreon.com/the Horror of Babylon. In closing, you can let your friends know that The Horror of Babylon is available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audible, and all other major podcast apps. Stay scary.